I'd like to apologise for the brief endorsement of casual drug use in the previous anecdote. I'm not here to endorse casual drug use, and I've spoken to the people over at Drugs, and they don't want me to either. Not the ambassador they're looking for, apparently. Stick to your creams, roid boy! So with that in mind, here's one final very PG-rated drug anecdote, and by PG-rated, I mean literally, my parents were there. In the summer of 2021, when much of this story is set, my parents, my brother, my sister and I, we were back together as a family for the first time in several months. We went away for the weekend. We were very excited. And my brother and sister and I, we decided to celebrate this by waiting till our parents had gone to bed on the Saturday night, and then dividing into thirds and sharing an edible cannabis gummy the size, shape and texture of a Haribo bear. Ladies and gentlemen, the weekend. We were excited to see what mild-mannered adventures might be in store. We thought it would be a bit of fun. Cannabis, of course, a friend to many of us, I'm sure, especially during those stressful lockdown months. As the saying goes, it helps with your anxieties, unless it doesn't. And that's the roller coaster we love to ride. Here was how this particular evening panned out. 9:30 p.m, parents went to bed. 9:40 p.m, Subdivide the bear. Carving it up with a bread knife on the kitchen table. A real ceremony about the thing. 9:45, consume respective thirds of bear. 10:15 p.m, effects of bear start to take hold. 10:30 p.m, my father bursts from his marital bedroom to declare with real glee that mum's fallen asleep, he's had a second wind, and it's time to watch that documentary about the Eagles. Important to know that my father is a massive fan of the American rock band The Eagles. Important also to know that the rest of the family, not so fussed about the American rock band The Eagles, but he's been pushing for this documentary about them all weekend. He says it would be a nice thing to do as a family. The documentary is 3 hours long. We do not agree. We've been pushing back, saying things like, the weather's nice, we could go for a walk, or we could watch the Euros. Or at one point, my sister said, couldn't you just watch it on your own? And my dad replied, not again. And that's the man in 2 words. That's the adversary we're dealing with. We want to indulge our dad. He's a legend. He's a bit of a stress legend these days, and he enjoys reminiscing about the past, and that's when he's at his sweetest, reminiscing about the music he's enjoyed in his life and the people he's enjoyed it with. But we didn't want to watch this. And then, at 10:30 p.m. on the Saturday night, my father's persistence was rewarded because he'd caught his 3 children in a uniquely vulnerable position. Slumped lethargically on the sofa, baked to fuck like a lockdown sourdough. Far more pliable to his whims than he could possibly have dreamed of, and for reasons he couldn't claim to understand. So it was that we watched 2 hours of this Eagles documentary, and I don't mind telling you, it was one of the greatest nights of my year and maybe my life. I was so invested. We all were. I loved it. My brother loved it. My sister loved it. My dad, well, he knew he was going to love it. He wasn't quite ready for how much his children were going to enjoy it. He was expecting a bit more mid-doc resistance, rather than us snaffling up every detail of the Eagles' backstory like they were tangy cheese Doritos, which, to be fair, we were also snaffling up at a rate of knots. The clues were there. Sat upright on the sofa, non-ironically saying things like, cool, and wow. At one point, my brother asked my dad if he would pause the documentary so we could go to the loo. I have never seen my father smile so wide. A beam normally reserved for ambrosia rice pudding or his investment portfolio. He doesn't want to miss a second of the Hotel California writing and recording process. He's not made of stone, he's made of me. The following day, my siblings were talking about the success of this plan. And I said, what a great night. I said, I love the Eagles. And my brother said, no, you don't. You enjoyed the mood-altering chemicals that we consumed prior to the documentary. I said this was very cynical. Couldn't the 2 things be true simultaneously? Unfortunately, he won the argument that evening when we watched the 3rd hour of the documentary sober, and it was shit. You've got to know when to walk away. My father has since seen this show, and we've had a little chat. He'd like to know if that sort of thing was happening again. Not to ban it, not to participate in it, just to know that it was happening. and he also thinks that it's pretty cheap to be having a go at the third hour of the Eagles documentary. Of course, the stuff about the reunion is not as exciting as the first real wave of their success, but it is still a solid hour of rock documentary, and I shouldn't be advising people otherwise. There are my father's footnotes. I hope you enjoyed them. I'd like to thank my family for being such absolute rocks in my life over the last few years. I'd like to thank my daughter for being the best thing in my life, and her mum for making her with me. We're very proud of the girl we're raising and how we're doing it. I'd like to thank all of you for coming to my show. I love doing stand-up comedy. It's the greatest of privileges. I'm having the best time doing it. And finally, I'd like to thank a few friends, amongst whom quite a weird pattern has emerged over the last few years. I lived straight after the breakup with my friends Julian and Rose. Now, if an Eton boy does run into any sort of trouble in his adult life, there is usually an emergency Julian sent along pretty quickly. Steer the ship. Julian and Rose were two of my best friends before this, and my God, are they two of my best friends now. They said, you can live with us as long as you want. They were just down the road from my ex. They said, your daughter can come and stay whenever. And then a couple of months after I moved in, they said, oh, we've got a bit of news. Doesn't need to change anything, but all being well, in about 7 months, we'll be welcoming our first child into the world. 7 months later, I wasn't there. Actually, I was living in my parents' house during the lockdown. But after then, I moved back in with Julian and Rose. They then had another child. I'm actually godfather to that second child. You'd have to say a godfathership of politeness, really. You can only pop out so many lockdown sprogs before you invite your lodger to the church. But as well as that, I lived with my friends Checky and Jamie and my friends Jack and Kaz, both couples, both of whom almost immediately after I moved in announced that they too were expecting a child. Both of those children have since been born, and of all of the things I couldn't have anticipated about the last few years of my life, quite what a fertility treatment I would prove to be in the homes of my friends has been the strangest of them all. I don't want to make light of the struggle to conceive. Obviously, it's one of the hardest things anyone can go through. All I will say is, if you or anyone you know is going through that, I would be delighted to pop into the spare room for a few weeks, just to speed the process along. Who needs IVF when you've got IVO? Everything that's happened in my life has led me to that closing line. Thank you so much for coming to my show, ladies and gentlemen. It's been an absolute pleasure. Hope to see you all again at some point in the future. Goodbye.